The fire type is one of the most coveted types in all of Pokemon, with lots of great mons to pick from. So today I'll be trying to beat Pokemon Sword with Hardcore Nuzlocke rules, which you can pause to see on screen right now. Additionally, I won't be allowing myself to Dynamax at all, making gym fights a lot more difficult. The Galar region has some big obstacles for our dear fire types, but the type is just too cool not to try. So without any further ado, let's get right into it. And I mean, right off the bat, look at this sitting posture. What are we trying to get back problems? I feel like my daycare teacher. Sit up straight. Anyway, after getting our herniated disc fixed at the hospital, it's time to pick our starter. And since we have the option to pick a fire type, I pick one of my least favorite starters of all time, Scorbunny, and I name it Flopsy. And can we just take a second to address the fact that Hop picks the starter that we're super effective against? How does that make any sense at all? Either way, we make our way to the wild area, and it's important to know that I started this run a really long time ago, the 3rd of October, in fact. So I've been doing this run parallel with others for a long time, and this date happened to be when there was an event you could get the Gen 7 starters in raid dens. I honestly had no idea about this and thought it was awesome that I could find a Litten for the run. I end up naming it Zuko, and it has a really crummy minus attack nature, but that intimidate ability more than makes up for it. And while we're in the wild area, I of course pick up the leftovers, which is kind of gross, but it's gonna be useful. And I then make my way to Motostoke, where we can finally pick up an outfit that's straight up fire. Then on Route 3, there are a few Pokemon we can catch, but I end up going with Roly-Coly. It's not a fire type yet, but it will be once it evolves, and I name it Toph. We then take on this Postman in a Pokemon battle, which is probably why my mail is always late. How's this allowed? Either way, this is where Flopsy takes a turn for the worse and evolves into Raboot. Litten also very easily chomps its way through Challenger Bead and evolves into a Torracat. And look, I'll be the guy to say it, I can't get over the fact that Milo is so baby-faced. He seriously looks like someone put a baby's face on a bodybuilder. Anyway, before we take him on, Toph evolves into a Carkol, and it's finally time for our first gym challenge against Mr. Babyhead himself. And listen, I know exactly what you're thinking. Milo's got a team of grass types, we got a team of fire types, and this went pretty much exactly how you'd expect it to go. I pretty much just set up a nasty plot and hit him with a few flamethrowers, but that's not the important thing in this battle. Because I think I figured out why Milo only has a 5-year-old's head. Because who needs their head to grow up when you got a Pokemon like this? I mean, just look at the brain on this thing! Eldegoss has got to be the dictionary definition of 5-head. But even with such an abundance of brain cells on his team, he couldn't stand up to the flamethrower. It's the first gym badge, guys. What exactly did you expect? After our searing victory, we take a trip over to the Isle of Armor, where I can find my next encounter, a Torkoal. And the thing about Torkoal that's so handy and borderline necessary for the next gym is the fact that it has Drought, which sets up the sun. I name it May, and I move on to Pot Bottom Desert, where we can find ourselves a Firestone. And we're pretty much going to be putting that thing to use right away, since I capture myself a Vulpix, which I name Sokka, and it has a special attack boosting nature. And since we have that Firestone on hand, we can go ahead and evolve it right away into a Ninetales. Big Brain blasting off again! But with our new and improved team, it's time to take on one of the scariest gym leaders of the run, the Water-type user Nessa. I start the fight with Flopsy, and a couple of Electro Balls is enough to take out Goldeen. At this point, she sends in Arrokuda, so I decide to swap out Flopsy for May, who can set up the sun and power down those Water-type moves by 50%. Now that we're not at risk of being destroyed by Water-type moves, I swap in safely to Sokka and set up a nasty plot and proceed to destroy both the Arrokuda and the Dreadnought with a couple of Energy Balls. So that's it, boys. That's how we got the second badge. It's hard to tell if Wooper's female or male. Can you do it? I mean, listen, lady, I'm no expert or anything, but can't you just look down there and check if Wooper has a dick? Anyway, with that lesson in anatomy out of the way, it's time we move on to the 3rd gym, where we can actually capture ourselves a Sizzlipede inside the gym. I name it Tylee, and it's got the Flash Fire ability, which is actually going to come in handy. I also take a trip back to the wild area, where I go to Challenge Road and find myself a Salandit, which I capture, and it actually happens to be a female Salandit. This means that our newly caught Azula can actually evolve. And so the time has come for us to pitch fire versus fire as we face off against the 3rd gym leader Kabu, who leads with Ninetales as I set up the sun, and even still Ember does absolutely nothing. 2 Earthquakes from May is enough to take out the Ninetales, and I gotta say, it's really nice to not worry about Will-O-Wisp since all we have is fire types. Normally the Kabu fight is all about putting Rost Berries on your Pokemon and playing around that burn, but this time we can just kind of play this normally. After intimidating the Arcanine, I decide to go for a Shadow Claw, but it pretty much does nothing as it goes for an Agility. Since we're pretty much not going to be able to do any damage at all here, I decide to swap out into Azula, who doesn't take too much from a sun-boosted Flame Wheel. I fortunately then don't get flinched by Bite, and I can hit this thing with a Poison Gas, but Bite kinda did a lot of damage, so I go ahead and swap out again into May to set up the sun. The plan is to go for Protect to do as much poison damage as possible, then swap out once again into Zuko to power it down some more with Intimidate as I get hit by another Flame Wheel, which does nothing, after which we swap out into the ace up my sleeve, Carkol. goal. That's right, my grand plan for this gym was to get Arcanine as low as possible to try and take it out with an ancient power and hopefully get the boost, which I unfortunately didn't get. No, we of course don't have to get the boost. We're a rock type and we're facing off against Scorch, which is a fire and bug type quad weak to rock. And the first move we get hit by is a max Flutterby that does about a quarter of our health. Unfortunately, it also lowers our special attack, which means that the incoming ancient power is going to do a lot less, but this time I actually get the boost, which means I outspeed, and with the boosted attack, it's enough to just take out the Scorch. Sometimes the RNG gods bless you. Now that we got the first 3 badges, we can progress to Hammerlock and pick up the Wise Glasses. I have a friend who told me that he dresses up as a Pokemon and does Poke jobs. But it's not me, it's a friend. Oh yeah, a friend, I'm sure. The great Diglett wishes for you to subscribe. Now that we've reached Hammerlock, we can use wishing pieces in this very special raid den where we can actually find ourselves a Charmander. It has an amazing special attack boosting nature, and I go ahead and name it Avatar Aang. And after a little bit of training to prepare for the next gym leader, Aang evolves first into a Charmeleon and then masters airbending to evolve into Charizard. Tylee also evolves into Scorch and Azula into Salazzle, who has a near-death experience in the gym, but luckily we got through it. And so now that Team Avatar is really coming together, it's time to take on Bee and her fighting types. And so I start out with a Will-O-Wisp to make sure that this Hitmontop won't be doing any damage to me. I set up a few workups, and at this point, it's pretty much game over. Everything just gets absolutely clapped by an Air Slash, and I'm very glad that I didn't miss a single one of them. Smell you later, Bee. Wouldn't want to be ya.
Sudden big noises are a great way to get people feeling uneasy.
And speaking of cats, Zuko finally evolves into Incineroar. And Toph, despite not being a magma bender, evolves into a big steaming pile of coal. And guys, at this point, I'm convinced that Opal is just Lady Violet from Downton Abbey. Either way, fire resists fairies, so we're in for a treat. And naturally, the very first thing I do in the fight is misclick. Instead of clicking Nasty Plot, I clicked Venom Drench, and I get hit by a critical hit Sludge, but it's not the end of the world since we do get to answer Opal's question, which means we get our speed doubled. And with that little mishap behind us, since this Weezing can't really damage us at all, I go ahead and set up as many Nasty Plots as possible, which actually spends enough turns to get us to Opal's next question, which is the biggest paradox in this entire game. How in the world can her favorite color be purple when she's so incessantly into pink? Somebody answer me this riddle. Either way, at this point we're at +6, and our speed is already enough to outspeed every single Pokemon on Opal's team, so we can just pretty much steamroll our way through it. Not that anybody's surprised, unless you're running a type that's weak to Fairy, this gym is pretty much a walk in the park. After the gym though, Flopsy evolves into Cinderace, which is probably my least favorite starter final Evo of all time. I mean, this is Pokemon, not Mario playing fire football. Shortly after that unfortunate evolution, we arrive in Sirchester.
I hear that Pokemon in Pokeballs or boxes are nice and comfortable.
Yeah, because the only time we've seen one in there, he didn't look unhappy at all. Gordy and his rock types is our next gym challenge, and just look at the way this man throws out his Pokemon. Is he an Olympic gymnast? I mean, the guy's giving Sonic a run for his money. Either way, those theatrics aren't going to help as Barbaracle get absolutely destroyed by an energy ball from Sokka the very first turn. He then sends in his Shuckle, and I go for a Flamethrower, which does about a third as he hits me with a Rock Tomb to lower my speed. Not wanting him to go for it again, I decide to go for a Disable, as he of course then goes for a Stone Edge, because why would he go for Rock Tomb again? No, of course Stone Edge is a more powerful move, and I go for another Flamethrower after this, thinking it'll take it out, but it's left on just enough health to take me down to 30 HP, so I go ahead and swap out into May. This of course sets up the sunny weather, and we get hit by a Stone Edge that does barely any damage because of that massive defense we got, and we can take out the Shuckle with a Flamethrower. Next is Stonejourner, and since in my experience this thing always goes for Wonder Room, and no matter what, I decide to swap out into Zuko to get an Intimidate off, as it of course goes for the Wonder Room. And the Wonder Room always seems to help me out, since it swapped its 20 base special defense to its defense. One Earthquake is all it's going to take it out. Which means all we got to deal with now is Colossal, and I thought an Earthquake could take it out since it's quite effective, but it just barely left it alive, which means that a G-Max Volcalith is barely going to leave us alive. That was way too close. But the thing is, G-Max Volcalith does passive damage to you, and it leaves me at 4 HP before I can take it out with another Earthquake. That was way too close. But don't worry about it, guys. There's definitely enough time in this run for Zuko to restore his honor. But it's not Zuko's honor you need to worry about. I'm more worried about myself, since I kind of wasn't thinking about it, and I just let Sokka die during this trainer fight. This is the unfortunate truth about Nuzlocke. Sometimes the deaths are super underwhelming. But with that grave loss, we of course have to replace Ninetales, and who better than a Growlithe? I of course name it after the best character Iroh, and it does have Intimidate. And with with just one click of a Firestone, we've got a worthy replacement. With our new team assembled, it's time to take on the 7th gym leader Piers and his dark types. The first thing that happens is that we trade Intimidates with each other, which is pretty funny. Then it does what it always does and goes for a fake out, which means that we have to wait until the next turn to go for a Will-O-Wisp so that this Scrafty can't do too much damage to us. It then does what it does best and goes for a Sand attack, which means that it's time to swap out into May. She's got the Heat Rock equipped, which means that the Sunshine is going to last for 8 turns instead of 5, and I then get hit by a Brick Break. Hoping that it's going to go for Brick Break again, I decide to swap out into Scorch, and that's exactly what he does. The reason I decide to set up with Ty Lee is not just because she's a bug type, but also because Coil raises your accuracy. This means we don't care about Sand attack, but unfortunately, the Scrafty gets 2 critical hit paybacks in a row, which means we have to take it out the next turn with a Leech Life. This isn't exactly ideal since I know that I need 3 attack boosts in order to one-shot Obstagoon, but Malamar goes down in 1 hit, and it turns out Obstagoon isn't a big deal anyway since the most it can do is a Throat Chop, which as you can see did nothing at all. Finally, a Fire Fang is enough to take out the Skuntank, and because of all those Leech Lives, we have enough health to survive the Aftermath, and that's it for badge number 7. Which leads us to what I consider is the worst part of any Pokemon game, where the champion just plays the game for us and defeats all the Dynamax Pokemon. I mean, this is the perfect opportunity for Sword and Shield to insert more max raids into the story where we fight alongside Leon and Hop, but it just doesn't. It's definitely a missed opportunity in my humble opinion. Either way, after all that nonsense, it's time to take on the final gym leader, Ryhan, in a double battle. And honestly, this is the part of the game where things really start to go south for our team. I start off with Arcanine and Incineroar for double Intimidate, and we then get hit by a Breaking Swipe, which lowers our attack, which is one of the most annoying thing that Ryhan keeps doing, so I hit him with a Will-O-Wisp. I then decide to go for a Bulk Up with Incineroar just to set up a bit of defense since our attack is going to get dropped by Breaking Swipe anyway as he then sets up the rocks. The next turn, I go for Protect so that Flygon's Breaking Swipe only hits Arcanine, who we're going to swap out anyway, and I go for a Will-O-Wisp to burn the Gigalith as well so that we're pretty safe from damage at this point. I then go ahead and swap out a Zuko into May, who gets hit by Stealth Rocks and then sets up the Sun. And this is where I start to set up for my win condition. You see, I've decided to ban Body Press in all of my Sword and Shield runs since my second one, and the strategy I have in mind is very much disturbed by the fact that this Flygon keeps lowering my attack. So I decide to take it out with a Flamethrower, but it actually even survives the burn this turn, so I have to go for an Extreme Speed the next one to just take out the Flygon. This means that our curses are finally going to generate attack boosts, and this Gigalith keeps doing nothing to us. The incoming Sandaconda is kind of a problem since it does have Earth Power, so I'm going to be sending in Pokemon that all have weaker special defense than Torkoal so that it tends to go for them instead. Now, if I were a smarter man, I would have given my Charizard the heavy-duty boots, but in this case, it didn't matter too much. I take half my health from the Stealth Rocks, and then I get paralyzed. Aang also gets hit by a Body Press from Gigalith, which gives me a free curse on Torkoal, and I then of course have to switch out Aang, which can't be switched in again. I know Sandaconda won't use Earth Power on Zuko since Charizard is a flying type, and it ends up just going for Protect, and Gigalith misses a Rock Blast, giving me another free curse. I then swap out a Zuko into Flopsy, who gets hit by an Earth Power on the switch, taking it down to 3 HP, and then gets absolutely destroyed by a Body Press. Oh no, not my least favorite Pokemon. The next turn, it's time to do some damage, so I Protect with Zuko, who dodges a Glare, and then I get hit by a Body Press, after which I launch an Earthquake, which absolutely destroys Gigalith and does about half to Sandaconda. This means that G-Max Duraludon is up next, and I go ahead and swap into Iroh to get another Intimidate on it. It is kind of unfortunate that I had to decide who to sacrifice here, and that it had to be Arcanine because it's one of my favorite Pokemon, but unfortunately there was really no way around this. Sandaconda then hits me with a Glare, which could end disastrously, but I hit the superpower, which just barely leaves the Duraludon alive. I decide that Scorch is the least useful member on my team because if I send in Charizard, it just goes down, and I definitely need Incineroar since we just lost one of my Intimidators, but Tylee actually managed to survive the Max Rockfall. This means that Protect, of course, dodges the Glare, and we can take out both Sandaconda and the remaining health of Duraludon with another Earthquake, which means we got by with only 2 deaths. Phew, I'm glad we're done with that one. Now that we finally have the water bike, we can make our way to the Lake of Outrage where I find myself a Flareon. It's a little too high level to use at the moment, but I name it Katara, which doesn't fit at all since it's a fire type, but so's everything else. And after some trials and tribulation through the snow, we make our way to the capital city of Wyndon, which is where we have to take on the final cup. And our very first opponent is Marnie, and I'm confident enough to beat this battle with Zuko alone. I then start setting up Swords Dances since I'm not afraid of the only attacking move it has, Snarl. After that, it's a clean one-hit KO sweep of every single Pokemon she has except for her Grimmsnarl, which just barely survives a Leech Life. which means that I'm gonna have to eat the incoming max Starfall, but since I resist it with fire, it only does about half damage, after which Marnie heals up with a full restore, but since we're faster than the Grimmsnarl, we get to use 2 moves in succession, and 2 Drain Punches is enough to take it out and beat our first opponent in the Champions Cup. Our second opponent is then of course Hop, but I haven't included him at all in this video since we pretty much beat the pants off of him every single time. After which, we really have no reason to be suspicious of Rose at this point in the story, but we investigate him anyway. And the only thing that tips us off that these guys are bad guys is the fact that Oleana goes absolutely bananas. The first turn, I start off the fight by outspeeding this Frostlass and taking it out with a flamethrower. And this really only accelerates the time until we have to face the real threat, Milotic. So I go ahead and swap out of Azula into her trusty friend May, who can set up the sun, which means that the incoming Surf from the Milotic is going to do half damage. The Milotic, seeing that it can't do too much damage with a Surf, goes for an Aqua Ring as I go for a Solar Beam, which does about 40% damage. Seeing as I'm not doing enough damage here, I decide to swap out into Aang as the Milotic goes for a Safeguard. And since Charizard is a much more powerful special attacker than Torkoal, it only takes 1 more Solar Beam to take out the Milotic. Salazzle is next and outspeeds with a Venoshock as we go for an Earthquake to take it out and then a Flamethrower to knock out the Serena. Finally, we have to deal with the garbage Pokemon, which I actually like a lot more than the Galarian starters, but I swap out into Toph as it Gigantamaxes. On the switch, Toph gets hit by the G-Max Rockfall, which does about 60% damage. The next turn, I then go for Protect to dodge as much damage as possible, and I actually manage to survive the quad-effective Max Quake. Not wanting to risk it going for Max Rockfall since I'm at such low health that either would do the trick, I unfortunately have to sack off Toph here, even though it would have been great to switch in Charizard on a Max Quake. I then decide to swap in May just to get the sun up instead of the Sandstorm, as Garbodor then turns into regular size. It hits me with a Gunk Shot, but with our massive defense, May actually managed to survive, and I hit it with a Flamethrower since I don't want to hit it on the special side to activate Weak Armor. We then beautifully switch in Charizard against a Stomping Tantrum and can take it out with an Earthquake. And now that we've defeated Oleana, we can go back to our regularly scheduled Champions Cup. Well, kinda. We first have to deal with Interrupter Bead. He starts out with Mawile, so I start with Zuko, and we do the Intimidate Stare Down. I then go ahead and swap into May just to set up the sun and swap right back out into Zuko. Now that we got 2 Intimidates on this thing, it's time to swap out into Azula. I end up having to take a Play Rough that does barely any damage, after which we can start setting up our nasty plots. After that, all we have to do is click Flamethrower and Sludge Wave, same we did versus Opal, and Bead is toast. But honestly, being done with Bead isn't exactly as awesome as it seems, because now we have to go up against Nessa and her water types once again. But this time, I've come with a plan. It's a much more involved plan, but we can start off by just taking out Golisopod in 1 hit with an Air Slash. Then comes Barraskewda, which is super fast and can do tons of damage with Liquidation, so I send in May to set up the sun. With the sun up, Drill Run is the most powerful move, so I swap back into Aang, who dodges it beautifully once again. Charizard then gets hit by a Liquidation, and even in the sun it does almost half damage, but Solar Beam does the trick versus both Barraskewda and Seaking. Nessa's next Pokemon is Pelipper, which of course has the Drizzle ability, which is going to set up the rain, so we're going to have to swap out right back into May again to set up our own weather. After that, anticipating the Pelipper to go for a Tailwind, I swap out into Azula, and that's exactly what the Pelipper does. The next turn, I know it's going to outspeed and go for an Air Slash, and I'm just hoping and praying not to get flinched so that I can disable it, which means that it can't use Air Slash versus Incineroar. Incin then of course gets hit by a Water Pulse on the switch in, and on the next turn, we go ahead and tank another one and set up a Swords Dance. I would have liked to set up more with Swords Dance, but since the Tailwind peters out, we have to take out the Pelipper so that we can outspeed the Dreadnought. Not sure if it's going to take it out, I go for an Earthquake, and it leaves the Dreadnought in the red. Unfortunately, my perfectly forged plan fell ever so slightly short, and hold on a second, did we just survive that? That's right, because of the sun we set up with May, we actually managed to survive the G-Max Stone Surge and take out the Dreadnought with an Earthquake, which means we got through Nessa with no casualties. Which means the Bee's up next, but we just pretty much rinse and repeat exactly what we did versus her in the first gym battle, and it's an easy victory. And so let's instead turn our attention to the final battle in the Champions Cup versus Ryhan and his Dragon types. Or really more like his Weather types, but either way, I decide to set up a couple of Swords Dances as this Torkoal goes for Yawn, but it doesn't know that I of course have the Chesto Berry to heal off that sleep as soon as we're afflicted. Not wanting to be yawned again, I take out the Torkoal as +4 and set up to +6 versus the Goodra as it sets up Rain Dance. I then take it out with a Dragon Claw and the Turtonator with an Earthquake. Flygon is next, but it of course sets up the Sandstorm at first, so I'm free to take it out with a single Dragon Claw. And since we're at +6, Duraludon goes down to 1 Earthquake, and that's it for Ryhan. You then have to take on the Evil Rose, but since he has all Steel types, it goes something like this. And so the time has come to face the final challenge versus Champion Leon. The champ starts out with Aegislash as I decide to start out with Azula. The very first turn, I set up a nasty plot which is going to be super important as the Aegislash decides to go for a Shadow Ball, which almost takes me out. It also lowers my special defense, but where we're going, we don't need special defense. After taking out the Aegislash with a Flamethrower, we have to go up against Haxorus, which is dangerous since it has Earthquake and Stab Outrage. Fortunately, 1+2 Sludge Wave is enough to do it, and out comes Inteleon. This is of course going to be another time for May to shine and set up the sun, as the Inteleon of course goes for a Snipe Shot, which does an incredible amount of damage for being in the sun. The next turn, May's unfortunately going to have to go down to a Snipe Shot, but she's served her purpose and set up the sun so that Charizard can come in and finish the job. The Inteleon then goes for a Tearful Look to lower our attack and special attack as we hit it with a Solar Beam, which isn't quite enough because of that Tearful Look. It then goes for a Tearful Look again, and another Solar Beam is enough to finish off the Inteleon, which is a huge threat that we don't have to worry about anymore. But after Inteleon comes Dragapult, which is another huge threat to contend with, so I go ahead and swap out into Ty Lee, who's gonna do some damage. First, I get hit by a Thunderbolt that does about 25%, and thinking he's gonna abuse the sun, Leon uses Flamethrower, which just boosts my Fire-type moves with Flash Fire. He then goes for Shadow Ball, which does quite a lot of damage, but a second Crunch is enough to take out the Dragapult. After that, a Flash Fire and Sun-boosted Stab Fire Fang is enough to take out the Mr. Rhyme. Finally, we only have to deal with Leon's Charizard, but this thing is way more of a threat than you might think. If it sets up even one boost with its max Airstream, it's over, so we have to let Ty Lee go down here to a max Rockfall. It is unfortunate that it sets up the Sandstorm, since I do have the Focus Sash on Katara, so that the next turn when we get hit by our max Rockfall, we actually manage to survive, but we would have anyway with that Sash. We can lower the speed with a Scary Face and then go down to Sandstorm. With only one Dynamax turn left, I send an Aang and go for an Air Slash, but I don't even think that Dynamax Pokemon can flinch, and a max Rockfall takes us out, securing the fact that it's not going to go for an Airstream. This of course means that Charizard has burned every single one of its Gigantamax turns, and I can go for a Sludge Wave, which puts it down to a point where I'm thinking it's going to go for a full restore the next turn as it takes out Azula. This means it's down to our last Pokemon, Zuko, versus Leon's last Charizard. I then clicked Swords Dance thinking that it was going to go for a full restore, but I get punished and it goes for an Ancient Power, but it doesn't take me out, and the next turn a Darkest Lariat is enough to seal the deal. That's right, with only one Pokemon left, Zuko truly redeemed his honor by helping me beat a Pokemon Sword Hardcore Nuzlocke using only Fire types. Yeah, it seems like getting through Sword and Shield Nuzlockes with 9 deaths is how I tend to do it. But overall, I had a super great time playing through this game with one of my all-time favorite types, the Fire type, and if you agree and got all the way to this point in the video, and maybe you could help me out and leave a like, and if you're not subscribed yet, just what are you doing? You may also want to consider following me on Twitch, since in January I got some big streaming plans. But other than that, remember to leave your suggestions down in the comments below, because I'd love to hear your ideas what we should do for the last challenge of the year. So until we see each other next time, have a good one.